And welcome back to the weird and the wonderful with Strange Bones. That's me. So we've been talking about witches and whether or not there is such a thing out there. Do they still exist today? Is it real? Are they suitably paranormal and supernatural? Is there more to be said? And of course, as per our usual, we have been bouncing around the world and looking at different countries and cultures, and we've been learning a whole lot about what makes a witch a witch. Cheers. And as we've gone around, we've discovered a number of things that can be said about it. We've learned that, in fact, what we call a witch can be one of several things, and whether or not a witch is a good thing or a bad thing is dependent on two very different perspectives. On the one hand, it is the perspective of the practitioner, which is, of course, very important, but it's equally important on the perspective of the society in which they live. And that sometimes is in direct contrast to what might be believed, as it were. So this causes interesting socio-political reactions and actions. And in some cases, it can be very, very negative. And in some cases, it can be something else. We've figured that you get three kinds: those that are essentially theocentric, those that are more shamanistic, and those that are, strictly speaking, more on the psychic level. And those that are theocentric generally would be considered, I suppose you would say, a priest or a priestess, but simply from a religion that is no longer considered to be mainline. So in that regard, it can produce, if you will, a number of difficulties, societally speaking. And Jesus is King has just asked, do I believe in Jesus? And I'm going to respond with my usual introduction to say that the aim of this channel is to look into what may or may not be out there, to consider what may or may not be real or believed, but nevertheless out there. And the answer to your question is it doesn't matter, because this is a channel for investigation and we don't promote nor deride any of it. We are interested purely in what is in society, in history and currently. And we know there are a great many things, and I don't discuss my personal beliefs on the channel because I believe that that is cause for a great deal of argument that does not promote the channel in any manner or form. And as we have a lot of different people on the channel from different religions and backgrounds, we're not here to cause argument, but rather to learn and to understand what may or may not be the case. And we have discovered that the difference between a witch and a priest, by and large, is societal view. And you have exactly done the one rule that we have on this channel. I am afraid to say that it is very, very important to us that we do not ever accuse or cause argument. And if you are rude on the channel, as you have just been, I'm afraid you get the boot, because that's the rule. So, unfortunately, my friends, we had to remove somebody for rudeness, because we do not allow rudeness. You are allowed to have your opinion, but you're not allowed to insult people. And while you are allowed the viewpoint that these topics might be considered bad, and many do, to be fair, many do not, and we keep that as important. So the only rule we have on the channel is you may not be rude or disruptive. So no, we do not discuss directly personal things. This is more, shall we say, an academic curiosity as to what might or might not be out there. And we have gone through some of the viewpoints from the Americas, from England going into Germany and Scandinavia, and now, of course, we are going to jump across to a very different country and culture to examine what they say and what is seen or believed. And in that regard, we are going to do China. And I'm going to remind people that we do like comments. You don't have to agree or disagree as long as you're polite. Accusations of people being Satanists, I'm afraid, count as very rude, and we don't accept that. I know that there are plenty of people that do not like the topics, and that's fine. We don't mind that. You do not have to follow it. If you feel that it is something you don't want to talk about, that's quite all right too. But we are interested and open-minded, and we are not accusatory. But do comment, do like, do subscribe. Do I know Anita? I don't. I don't know Anita. But I also don't allow people to accuse people of things just because we don't follow the same beliefs. On this channel, you will find that we have people who are Hindus, Christians, Muslims, atheists, all kinds. I believe there's at least 2 who might be Wiccan. So there are a lot of different viewpoints, and we certainly don't put anybody down for their beliefs. As long as everybody is friendly and polite, that's fine. But that said, do like, share, subscribe, and all of those good things as well, because that's what makes a channel work. And as you know from this channel, we look into all things supernatural, paranormal, strange, or just weird, because we like to, and we enjoy the differences. And with that said, I think let's get started. So, is there anything in China that counts as a witch? And the answer actually is yes. And they are falling into the category, so to speak, of the shamanistic. This is obviously going back in time quite a bit. And I don't know how much of this remains in modern China. So we have to admit to that, because there's a great deal that has changed over the years, of course. Now, in ancient China, especially during the Shang dynasty, which was between 1600 to 1046 BCE, there were figures known as the Wu. By the way, I do warn you that my knowledge of Chinese and the speaking thereof is deplorable, and therefore my pronunciation is not to be relied on in any manner or form. But the Wu were powerful figures who served as intermediaries between the human and spirit worlds, and they were often employed by the ruling elite for rituals, divination, and healing. They would use trance states, songs, and dances to communicate with the ancestors and deities, and influenced everything from the weather to political decisions, which made them pretty powerful if you think about it. We can see immediately the shamanic style right there, by the fact that they use trance states and dances and music and such. We know that after the Zhao possibly, dynasty, the influence of the Wu diminished because Confucian rationalism grew in prominence. But shamanic traditions continued in some certain areas in the ancient Chu area in the south, and they influenced early Taoism. Now, it is my understanding that the two major forms of philosophy or social belief, if you will, that currently are the main things in China will be either Taoism or Confucianism. So it seems that in the modern day, at least, the old ways have kind of gone. But there are a number of stories, apparently, within Chinese mythology that speak of powerful beings that are kind of like witches or sorcerers in that regard. And these included the 10 Witches of Ling Mountain from the classic of Mountains and Seas. These were 10 ancient female witches who possessed the divine knowledge inherited from the goddess Nuwa, and each specialized in different areas of knowledge, it seems, as well. So you had Wuxian, who was a shaman and ancestor of poison magic, which does seem to be a little bit threatening, at least in that regard. So possibly they were not always as good as you might think. There was also Wu Li, a puppeteer who could control people's minds. So definitely a dangerous possible thing. Now, there was also Shuemiu Niangnang, who was known as the Old Mother of Waters, who was a kind of water demon or witch from Taoist and Buddhist folklore. Different versions of her story do exist, including one in which she floods an entire city after a trick is played on her. Now, in Chinese folk belief, accusations of witchcraft often involve gu magic, a dark and feared form of poison magic that even today is a source of stigma in rural China. The legendary witch Wuxian is credited as inventing it, and it involves trapping poisonous insects to have them fight until only one remains, creating an incredibly potent curse, which sounds particularly dark. These days, though, in the rural communities, people that are called Zhu or witches are believed to use this gu magic to poison their neighbors through food or even eye contact. And of course, we see in a number of cultures, in fact, that eyesight or eye contact is very often associated with witchcraft and such in that regard. We know also that these beliefs have led to the ostracization of any witch households, forcing them to band together. And a 2018 study in the Journal of Nature Human Behavior documented this phenomenon. And here you see how a societal viewpoint, whether or not it is founded, true, or whatever, can directly affect the viewpoints around this kind of belief. Historically, accusations of witchcraft were also a dangerous tool used in the imperial court in order to frame rivals and orchestrate purges. So China also had their version of the uh, legendary witch hunts that we saw over quite large portions of Europe and the Americas, which is very interesting indeed. We know that there was the Wu Guo affair in 91 BCE during the Han Dynasty, where a devastating witch hunt was initiated after a conspiracy accused the crown prince of using sorcery to curse the Emperor Wu. The affair led to mass executions and the suicide of the crown prince, his mother, and two princesses. So clearly, the effect on politics was pretty hardcore. Also, the Empress Chen Zhao, as a result of the Wu Guo affair, banished because of this, and was, as a result, labeled and is remembered to this day as the Chinese witch. Now, the Western concept of a witch has been adapted and reinterpreted in modern Chinese context, especially in media and entertainment, which, as we all well know, have quite a lot of effect on people's view of these things. And this often bears little resemblance to traditional Chinese folklore, drawing instead on European imagery. However, some of the practitioners of Chinese folk religion in areas like Taiwan still engage in forms of shamanism and mediumship, as was traditional, even if it is no longer something to be seen in the more established parts of modern China. Now, we know that the concept, as it were, of Asian witchcraft varies greatly all over the different parts of the Asian areas. In ancient times, magic played a very significant role, and we see it in a number of places in and around Asia. So, Egypt and Babylonia and the Middle East, you've got all kinds of references to this sort of thing. And indeed, we know that even in the Abrahamic religions, there is quite a lot to be said. And of course, we know that from the Jewish traditions, you have the Kabbalic forms. In South Asia, even today, though, there is still witch hunts performed, and clearly that this fear remains in society, and these deeply entrenched superstitions have perpetrated acts of great violence and marginalization against those accused of witchcraft. And it shows that very often this can cause a number of human rights violations and such in that regard. In Chinese culture, the practice of gong tao involves black magic for the purposes of revenge and personal gain. And you have echoes of it in Japan, Korea, and in the Philippines. And of course, you have, I suppose, almost a battle between where the bad ones do the curses and the good ones try very hard to counter and protect. So you have both sides. And in almost all of these areas, it tends to be very much shamanic in its style in that regard. Now, sticking to China and avoiding all the other interesting areas, which we will get to in their due time, of course, we've seen that in some cases, the witch hunts were even assisted by the shamans, and the idea, I suppose, was that it was aimed at getting rid of the bad ones and keeping things safe for the good ones. Well, one hopes at least, though we suspect, given the other stories around this, it seems to imply that there was a great deal of politics involved, and we know that this can go south very fast. So that is hardly surprising at all. We know that in modern times, Gong Tao in Hokkien and Teochew in Cantonese or Jiangtu in Mandarin are the terms used when someone is suspected of have been attacked by black magic, and it's believed to be a fusion of poison skills. So we're seeing very much a trend here that, in fact, poison seems to be the key function and methodology, as it were, surrounding black magic. It seems that the origins of this form of magic is in Yunnan, in China, and it's all about dealing with social issues, possibly in a fairly negative manner. Now, Chinese shamanism is generally called Wuism. There are a number of words, some of which get a little bit complicated for the non-Chinese speaking person, i.e. me. But definitely it's the shamanic religious traditions that preceded modern religions, and the features are especially connected to the ancient Neolithic cultures such as the Hongshan culture, and the shamanic forms are intrinsic to the folk religion. Various ritual traditions are rooted in this, and Chinese ritual masters are sometimes identified as Wu, though most orders don't self-identify as such. And there again, we immediately see how the views of things do not necessarily match the views of those who are actual practitioners thereof. It's developed around the pursuit of long life or the status of being a jian or a holy man. Now, what is the meaning of these things? Well, the meaning of the word Wu seems to be roughly able to be translated as a shaman or wizard, indicating a person who can meditate with the powers generating things, and this sort of implies an improvement of inner spirit. And it was first recorded in the Shang dynasty, as we said, and it could be either gender. During the late Zhou dynasty, Wu used to specify a female shaman as opposed to a Ji or male shaman. Uh, so changes did occur over time, which may also, in some way, have effects within society. You also have a number of other words, all on the general theme of Wu, which implies that uh, it had to do with these people who used that specific form of magic. Uh, they were considered in some ways to be a spirit medium in many ways, and modern Chinese distinguishes the native Wu from the other kinds in other cultures, such as the Siberian Saman, which is quite different, which comes from the Indian word shramana or wandering monk, and we get words like shaman showing similar linguistic roots to this. So it clearly follows a particular theme in this regard. And much thanks to you for those kind likes there. Hey, Rance, I hope I've said that right, but thank you very much for the likes. So you've got clear indications that you had two kinds of sorcerer. The ones who deal with all the good things, um, and those that dealt with, shall we say, the bad kind. So you've got a difference possibly between the shaman type and the diviner type compared with the Tibetan Ba, which was a sorcerer of a different type. And of course, we know that there are quite strong links between China and Tibet for a number of reasons, though they are nowadays considered to be different countries by some and not by all. Politics is a wonderful game. And thank you so much for that. I would love to get to a 1K of hearts. That would be amazing. So thank you, thank you. So we know then that there are similarities and there are differences, and these things might be important. We know in Tibet, your Bonpo sorcerer is a very particular kind, and they are very much part of the very old Bon religion, which has strongly influenced Tibetan Buddhism, which makes it very different in a lot of ways to Chinese Buddhism. So there are differences that matter. The cultural changes certainly show that in a great many ways. So you've got differences there. You also have differences with the Koreans, which we can refer to as Muism, which is very similar in its origins to the Chinese Wuism, but kind of has grown off in a different direction in that regard. We do know, however, that there are links to dance in the words, which implies that dancing as well might have been part of what was the rituals. They were certainly considered to use rituals and such to achieve their aims in some way, and they were certainly shamanic. And most shamanic traditions either use some form of dance or music or singing or chant in that regard. Um, and you find that specific cultures have specific ways that the traditions of magic goes. We know, for example, that in South Africa, the magic users here do not use much at all in terms of spoken spells. Um, it's almost entirely a shamanic connection to the ancestors, which then leads to or through the use of poetries, potions, I should say, sorry, and such like, to achieve their aims. Whereas your English and your Nordic certainly go in for the spoken and the sung, and music plays quite a big part as well in that regard. So in China, it seems dance may well have been important. Um, Certainly, poisons were important as well. So we've got a whole lot of interesting connections, but there was, as is very often the case in many of the shamanic styles, ancestral worship, which matters. One difference, however, that I do note from the sort of South African version is generally it's considered that one doesn't directly try to contact or deal with God, even though God is there and is believed in. Generally, God is considered too far above us, and therefore one contacts the ancestors who may or may not go further on towards the Creator on behalf of we who are mere humans. Whereas in the Chinese religion, both were dealt with um, by the correct person. So we see that it's developed around ancestral worship and included also varying gods. Um, Now, interestingly, and unlike a number of the places we've seen thus far, these gods are not forces of nature as are found in many other cultures and countries, but rather deified virtuous men. The ancestors of the emperors, for example, were called Di, and the greatest of them were called Shangdi, the highest lords, and were identified with dragons. So dragons certainly do take a part in the magic, and we wonder what exactly the dragons were and how they were seen, because that was important. And huge thanks to you, Heyrance. You did indeed, and I am very, very grateful for that. Thank you so much. That's awesome. I do appreciate your efforts on that behalf. We love the likings and we love the sharings and all, so thank you so much. And please, if you have any questions or comments, make sure you drop them in, and I will do my best to answer them. So we're looking at deified people. Obviously, status mattered, so I imagine you could do a lot better if you were an emperor than if you were a local trash collector. But cosmic powers also are very important and dominate nature. So the sun, the moon, the stars, the winds, and the clouds were considered to be informed by divine energies. No problem at all. And yeah, you got to have your rest. What with school, so have a great evening, and thank you so much. It's been great to have you on, and yeah, it would be great to see you again. We are on every night at 10 o'clock, except for Sundays, South African time, GMT +2. So yeah, of course we can. Why not? I think that would be um, a wonderful thing to do. There you go, sir. And we always approve of having people to assist on these varying things. So yeah, thank you so much. Monday or Friday or Saturday. Sounds fantastic. And yep, we will see you on one of those days. Absolutely. Have a good night. So, Rabbi D, welcome. And huge thanks for those extra likes there. So during these times, the cosmic powers dominate. The Earth's god is She, or Tu, and the Shang period had two methods to enter into contact with the divine ancestors. The first is the numinous mystical Wu practice involving dances and trances, exactly as said. And the second is what they call a. There you go. Thank you so much. I always appreciate the help. Have a fantastic one. And yes, good luck with school tomorrow. And sleep sweet. So we see the shamanic dances and trances, yes, as per. Bye bye, bye bye, have a good one. But the rational method was what they would do using oracle bones, which is a very interesting methodology. Now, the Zhou dynasty succeeding the Shang was more rooted in an agricultural worldview, and they opposed the ancestor gods of the Shang. And after this, then the gods of nature become dominant. And the utmost power in this period was Tian, heaven, and Di, the earth, forming the cosmos in a complementary duality. So you see, with the we're talking about the views that informed what we currently refer to as witchcraft in China. And we see that there are shifts in beliefs which change what made witchcraft and how it was viewed and what was important to it. And we see that these varying forms absolutely had huge influence, not just over the general public because of their power, but in politics as well, shaping how things moved. And it is indeed fascinating because you see similar things in a number of other cultures. And as we have also seen in modern China, most of the forms of witchcraft have gone away and they've lost their socio political abilities, with Confucianism and Taoism definitely becoming far more important. So, in the Chu kingdom, which still is BC, we're talking between 1030 and 223 BC, of the spring and autumn period, which are ever so pretty names. They were very much interested in the Wuist practices and rituals, and it's reflected in the poetry, calligraphy, artwork, and the famous lacquerware, which comes from this period as well, which often portrayed ethereal and mythological elements that are not otherwise found in the relics of other contemporary states. Well, sad to say, a number of people feel that even talking about these kind of things is bad. And just earlier, before you joined on, I was accused of being a Satanist by somebody simply because I was talking about it, without actually figuring out whether or not I had any particular beliefs in any ways. And I said that I'm not on here to discuss my personal beliefs or religions. We are here examining the weird and the wonderful because it's interesting. And just for the record, no, I'm not a Satanist, I'm afraid. I do not follow that religion at all. So, yes, they are indeed wrong in that regard. But we've done witches, we've done aliens, we've done ghosts, and we will do more weird and wonderful things. Um, So absolutely, yeah, that was the comment that they put up to say that yes. So unfortunately, I said, sorry, if you're going to be rude and accuse people, we have one rule on this channel: no rudeness. We have too many different religions and cultures on the channel that we can't start leveling accusations because people believe differently. And so I unfortunately did give him the boot, which is one rule that I stick to. But with that said, we see that absolutely, I am fully in agreement there. Discovering history is, I think, one of the most important things of all. If we don't know where we come from, how on earth can we decide where we are going? And all religions ultimately are important and hold a place within society because they have such importance to the way people think and act. And we see that in the modern world very much so, where different viewpoints in that regard have caused such huge conflicts world over, and indeed a lot of harsh uh, effects on the way things go. We know even today in South Africa, where I am, for example, if somebody is accused of abatagati, bad witchcraft, whether or not it's true, it can lead to severe repercussions in society, and even death as a result. And we know this as fact. It's a very frightening thing. All good, my friend. Thank you for that. So, religious tolerance is quite important. And religious understanding as well, I would say, is very important as well in that regard, because if we don't have it, it can lead to the kind of conflicts that cause a lot of hate. And if there's one thing that is very, very bad for any kind of society, it's the promotion of hate. We do not allow it, and we cannot allow it. I mean, I've got friends who are Hindu, and they know damned well that I am not a Hindu, and I do not believe what they believe. But mutual respect, allows. I've very often visited Hindu temples, and they're wonderful places, and I'm fascinated by it. It's great. I don't believe it, but I'm not required to believe in something in order to respect somebody else's belief and to appreciate the culture surrounding. It's just like that. So it's important. Respect, thank you. And I would like to think I can respect all of you guys as well, because it matters. If we don't allow that, it leads to a lot of trouble. You've got to appreciate. And with that said, we can move on to the King dynasty. No, you're right. There are those who don't like being here. And if they don't like being here, they do not have to stay. I've never insisted that anybody has to stay. I love the company. I love the comments. I enjoy greatly the different viewpoints on what people think, and I like the history, of course, absolutely, because it matters. So, yes, thank you for that. So, we've all heard of the Manchu dynasty, the rulers of the Qing dynasty, and they introduced substantial elements of Tungusic shamanism, Hong Taiji, put shamanistic practices into the actual service of politics and the state. Who is my kindest viewer? Well, I have one or two. Endless Thoughts, Karina Britz. We've got a couple. There's Moketse, Emperor's Son, and they're great supporters and quite long-time supporters since I started with the lives. So we've got some good people that join in, and certainly add lots of interesting comments, and that's pretty cool. Now we know that these shamanistic practices were used, but here again you see interesting effects when politics and religion combine, because they promoted this one particular style, but forbidded others to erect any new shrines for ritual purposes of the other religions. And of course, thank you, and you are welcome to as long as you are able. But don't mess with your schooling tomorrow. But do enjoy yourself. We find then that in the 1620s, now we've finally gotten over the 0 point, as it were. The king ruler conducted shamanic sacrifices at the Tangse of the Mukden, which doesn't entirely make a lot of sense to me, but basically what it meant was they started expanding things and spread their religions in that regard as they went, and they started conquering China, which is very important because China was not well, it wasn't a country. Well, in your school they actually splash you with water. That's a scary thought. I didn't know they were allowed to do things like that these days. But even if you enjoy it, do be careful. So the Qing dynasty by this time managed to conquer Beijing. So they had started and began to move around China, taking over the different parts and spreading their own religion with it as they moved around, and using the professional shaman, who interestingly were usually women, to conduct the ceremonies and so on. And this lasted until 1912, which is not that long ago at all, when the king emperors abdicated. Do you do homeschooling? Because there I can absolutely believe that the parentals would definitely be free with the splashings of the water. Absolutely, absolutely. So in 1747, the Qianlong Emperor commissioned the publication of a shamanic code to revive and regulate the practices which he feared was becoming lost. He had it distributed to the bannermen to guide their practice, but we know very little of how well this policy worked. Mongols and Han Chinese were forbidden to attend shamanic ceremonies, partly because of their secret aspect, which attracted to the rituals the curiosity of Beijing dwellers and visitors to the Qing capital. The French Jesuit Joseph Marie Amiot, published a study on the shamanic code called the Rituales de Tartares Mandachus determines et fiches par l'empereur comme chef de sa religion in 1773, which was a very, very, very long title for a single book. But yes, there you go. Do I not smile all that much? I'm surprised. I've never noticed. I suppose I am not a smiley person, but there you are. But yes, don't necessarily fall asleep on your phone. That's always a terrible thing. It needs to be plugged in so it's ready for tomorrow. But sleep well, be good, and be good to yourself. So these books were kept translated and distributed. My English is escaping me. You are a hero, sir. But thank you very much for the support. And I will absolutely, at the end of all of this, make sure to follow you back and all the rest of it as well. So, thank you very much. I will do my best to also support you. So, they've tried to put out all of the different things to systemize and reshape what was initially a very fluid and diverse belief system. And this, of course, went on to affect not just China, but other places like Tibet and more. And we know also in northeast China, the people there are considered to be quite different from central and southern Chinese folk. And their religious views are different because the interaction with the Han region, which for many Chinese were considered to be outsiders in a great many ways, and the folk religion of the other Tunguistic people, like the Manchu shamanism, all affected them. So the shaman would perform various ritual functions for groups of believers and local communities, such as the moon drum dance and the riding for the immortals. So zoom out, sir, and have a great one. Have a lovely night. This, of course, has now declined sharply, as we have said, owing to Neo-Confucianism, which is the cultural revival of Confucianism as an ethical, social, and religious system which dominated Chinese philosophy from the 13th through to the 19th century. And this has become the new sort of thought patterns and way it needs to go. We know that during Maoist China, all religious practices disappeared from any public space. So until Mao's death in 1976, Red China, as it was known, the People's Republic absolutely forbade any religion. So spirit mediums have slowly since the 80s started to reappear, but they still operate with a very low profile, working from homes, relying on word of mouth to generate business. Though there are certain newly built temples under a Taoist association, which is to be legitimate under the law, the shamanism and the religion itself has been critiqued by Western scholars due to an unfair and limited comparison to favored religions such as Christianity and other modern and more documented religions. So it's not considered very good by very many in the modern age, and it's very slow to come back. Many of the spirit mediums are viewed as scammers and are frequently portrayed on television shows and comedies as fools or crooks. Along with the focus on science, modern medicine, and material culture in China, which has created serious doubt in spiritual practices, shamanism is viewed as an opposition to the modern focus and the pursuit of modernizing. The marginalization of shamanism is one of the reasons that it's mostly practiced in rural areas rather than in the cities. And the lack of enforcement of anti-shamanic policies among authorities in rural areas has helped it grow there a bit. And this is either because they believe in shamanism themselves or they look the other way in concession to the local beliefs. So there is that in that regard. Munib Adams, jy gaan slaap mos, geniet, nee. So shamanic practices today include controlling the weather, healing diseases that modern medicine cannot treat, exorcism of ghosts and demons, and divining the future. These are the key roles that it plays, which is not unlike the roles that it had way back in the past. The decrease is not reflected in all areas, however. It does maintain a certain amount of popularity in areas around southern China, such as Chaoshan, and in rural northern China. Now, Taiwan has tried to ban shamanism, though in the end it only managed to restrict it a bit. And there are still many there who openly practice without the stigma that it's got in large parts of China. Chinese mediumship, which originated in the shamanism, is widely practiced in Chinese folk religion in Taiwan. Taoism, talisman, and certain sorcery practiced in Taoism also is connected to shamanism and does have a following as well. So we are seeing a number of things that fit in. Now, this, of course, leads us to look at those who are the sources of witchcraft and such. And as we mentioned earlier, one of them is Shuimu, or as sometimes known as Shuimu Nyang, who is a kind of a witch out of Buddhist and Taoist origin. She is identified with the youngest sister of the transcendent white elephant, which is Buddha's gate warder. According to Chinese folklore, she is responsible for submerging the entirety of Sishao, which was an ancient city located in the Anhui province, under the waters of the Hongse Lake in 1574 AD. And she is currently sealed at the foot of a mountain in the Zhuyi district. But different tales of her do exist in different regions. So in Suzhou, Anhui, she is considered more to be like a demon goddess, while in Toyan and Shanxi is believed that she was just a woman who was gifted a magical whip by an old man. The word in Mandarin Shui means water, and Mu is mother, and Nyang Nyang may mean goddess. So she's kind of considered to be the old mother of waters and possibly some kind of a water deity. Um, she is said, and here again we see the dragon aspect, that she can turn into a dragon or sometimes a snake. And according to Henri Dor's researching into it, her human form, she carries a sword along with two buckets and looks quite youthful despite being called the old mother of waters. Um, According to Chinese folklore, she inundated the city yearly and on the insistence of the locals. So, because they didn't like it, the Jade Emperor, who was Yu Huang, um, one of the most important uh, of the primordial gods in that regard, raised an army to capture her and deprive her of her powers. However, she was able to trick the army and escape, after which she continued to wreak havoc on the city. One day she was carrying 2 buckets of water near the city gate, and a famous philosopher, Li Laojun, uh, who was a philosopher from Tao, that uh, kind of becomes one of these deities, ancestral deities, as the stories move on. Um, Suspected that she was going to attack. So while she was away, he led a donkey to the buckets and allowed it to drink the water. But the donkey was unable to finish all the water because the buckets were filled with the sources of 5 great lakes. And Shimu saw through Li Lao's scheme and overturned one of the buckets with her foot, which created the massive flood that submerged the entire city. What's interesting here, though, this is a kind of a theme that you spot in a number of different countries' mythologies. I know in Nordic mythology, one of the legends of how Thor was tricked uh, was when he was given a number of tasks, and of course, the Svartalfar that he was with a giantess, if I remember correctly, uh, told him to drink her horn of mead, but it was in fact all the oceans of the world, and he only managed to lower the oceans by 1 foot. Even a god couldn't drink it all. Um, there were several other stories around the world that also fits to that type. Um, and it's sort of a thing that the hero is tricked because the opponents are cheating somehow. But nevertheless, ultimately, they manage to overcome the varying things. There's also an interesting story connected with her, which is a continuation of the submerging of the city, where there were some magic noodles. And here we see the appearance of the Monkey King, who we see in a number of different cultures. Now, in Chinese mythology, he is called Sun Wukong, and it's quite possible that he is something that has come into the Chinese view of things through the travels of Bodhidharma from India, and maybe an evolution in a way of Hanuman. Of course, Sun Wukong turns up in the journey to the west, um, and a very naughty, if quite powerful, deity. And Sun Wukong tries to capture her, but she continues to slip through his fingers, and so he asks Canon, or Guanyin, the goddess of mercy, and the Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara. I definitely said that wrong, but nevertheless, for help. So Shuimu was famished after being constantly chased, so she went to a noodle stand where Canon, who was disguised as a woman, was waiting for customers with 2 bowls of food. However, while she ate the noodles, they turned in her stomach into iron chains with the ends protruding from her mouth. The remaining contents of the bowls also became chains and welded themselves to the ends of the ones in her mouth, and she was forced to surrender. Canon then ordered Sun Wukong to chain her in a well at the foot of a mountain in the Zhuyi district. And it is believed that when the water is very low there, you can still see the end of the chain. And she remains there to this day. So we can see that the view of witches in China was that while they were often not good, or were at least very dangerous, they were also immensely powerful in the stories. So they were certainly something people feared and considered important, whether good or bad. They also had connections to the gods, to the demons, and varying other things as well. And they used varying methods to deal with things. Sometimes they had magical items, they had magical assistants, and more. So, a lot of stories in that regard. Now, some of the other rather terrifying beings of witchcraft include the 10 witches, and one of those that I mentioned was the puppeteer Wu Li. And even the mightiest can falter under the sway of words alone, and in this domain, the puppeteer reigns supreme. Wu Li is the embodiment of the conjoined twins, mockery and grief, and true to her title, she manipulates the emotions of her prey, eroding their self-worth until they succumb to her control. Once ensnared, she weaves her thread throughout their bodies, transforming them into her most devoted soldiers. She is regarded as the ancestor of mind readers, psychics, and fortune tellers, and yet the trauma from her early life led her down a dark path. So she's one of the creepy ones. But interestingly here, the 10 witches are ancient human females who inherited divine knowledges from the goddess of life. And they dedicated themselves to discovering the origin of human consciousness, each one specializing in a different area of knowledge. And over thousands of years of research, their bodies and minds have become increasingly distant from normal humanity. The next interesting one, which I really do like, and which I'm going to try and throw up a picture of, just because I particularly enjoy the artwork on this, and I'm going to throw it up behind me for you to check out. If I can do it without it becoming annoying. Go ahead and be good. Be nice. Come along. There we go. We're starting to work. This isn't the entire picture simply because I can't fit all of it into the screen. And in fact, I'm going to have to redo it so we can fit bits properly. But what I particularly enjoy about this particular picture is that, tell me I'm wrong, but it absolutely does remind me of a lemur, which I think is really sweet. And you can see behind me, riding actually, though you can't see it in what I managed to take out, riding a capybara, but she certainly looks like a lemur. Now, Wu Pan can bring drawings to life, surrounding herself with her creations, and if it weren't for her short attention span and insatiable curiosity, she would be the most powerful witch, capable of conjuring even new life into existence. She finds joy in crafting creatures that defy biological logic but which melt into lifeless water soon after, her only success being the platypus. But Wupan wouldn't care. She enjoys going on leisurely adventures with her mount, a capybara, and gifted with innate instinct, she often drops hints or warnings to adventurers, ensuring their safety and blessing them with good fortune, which I think is a delightful form of witch. But not all are as delightful. We also have, for example, Damila, who in fact is of Pathian origin, a Zoroastrian assassin, which is quite interesting and is supposed to be a truly awful being in that regard. There are several others as well, of course, and they've been brought forward into modern video games as well, I believe, which is quite cool. We've spoken of the one Wuxian who invented poison witchcraft and who is capable of doing quite terrible creatures, and not a nice one at all, but not all of them are bad. There are varying other forms as well, which makes them very interesting and rather cool in that regard. We do like this. But we've spoken of the witch hunts. So, in the old superstitions, there was a curse quite similar to one seen in other witchcraft traditions, where one would make a kind of a voodoo doll out of straw and put the name and date of birth of the person that it was directed at, and do a particular kind of ritual to bind the doll to the target person. Once bound, they could then curse the victim by hammering or pinning the doll and make that target person feel the pain and discomfort thereof, which is quite interesting. And while most would say that this is not real at all, especially in the modern day, it was believed in very strongly in the past and was used by concubines in the palace to curse other concubines or princes. But if you were caught doing it, punishment was particularly harsh. We know that one of the great emperors of the Han dynasty, possibly the second most important one, was also a particularly cruel tyrant, who ultimately repented for his cruelty before his death, which possibly didn't please anybody much at all, but nevertheless, he had a very troubling relationship with his son, the crown prince, and in his old age he also became very superstitious. And one day he had a dream that he was attacked by a large group of wooden men. Fearing that somebody was cursing him, he ordered a massive witch hunt in the palace. His secret police officer, Zhang Chong, had a grudge with the prince and planted a voodoo doll in the prince's quarters, and he sent people to report that the crown prince was responsible for the emperor's illness. Already in fear of being forced to lose his succession, the prince eventually gathered an army by forging a royal order and personally executed Jiang. So that taught him a lesson. Jiang's followers who escaped reported to the emperor. The emperor was hesitant and sent messengers to investigate, but the messengers replied that the prince forged the emperor's orders and was planning a rebellion to replace him and attempt to kill him, and the messenger too. And there were a lot of half-truths in the story, but the key point was the emperor believed it, and he gathered his own army, crushed the rebellion, and ordered the empress to commit suicide and forced the prince into hiding. So you can see the political effect that belief in witchcraft could have. Many advisors tried to calm the emperor, but he was enraged, and so he executed them too. That seems a bit rough, but nevertheless. Eventually, one managed to convince him that the prince was merely trying to kill Jiang, and his actions of taking the army was more of a son stealing from his father rather than outright rebellion. But before the emperor could officially pardon the prince, he had already committed suicide, and he was found in hiding, where he did it to avoid arrest. The emperor was deeply saddened by his witch hunt that led to this inner war, and he publicly announced his regret and constructed monuments to his lost son. But of course, it was too late. But there you go. Interesting story, nevertheless. And of course, as always, we saw that in Europe the witch hunts happened during political upheaval, and in China it was exactly the same. Political upheaval and witchcraft was demonized, and things in straight away was used to blame people. Power structures were very much the place where these things happen, by and large, I would say, but very interesting. And I found in my research a number of good comments by people from China who point out a number of things in this regard, but they do say that the closest more modern thing to a witch hunt in China, by and large, would be the Cultural Revolution, whereby it was against religion and superstition in that regard. And people's views are very anti superstition these days. They want to be much more formal and forward and scientific and all of that in order to improve matters. And one wonders if this is something that does improve matters, or if it doesn't. But yeah, I suppose that is all we can say. Now, modern witchcraft in China, they say, is not individuals practicing a formal religion, but rather people labeled as zhu or witch due to social dynamics in rural communities. It's very often applied to women believed to possess poison-giving powers, and it's a form of social exclusion, fostering distrust and limiting interactions such as marriage and gift-giving between tagged and untagged households. The concept functions more as a label for individuals considered untrustworthy or embodying bad karma, rather than something whereby a practitioner would self-identify in that regard. Karma, of course, is important, and social structures as well. The phenomenon is found in a number of the matrilineal communities in southwest China, where the witch label relates to social tensions and the establishment of a patriarchal dominance over matriarchal structures. This is from studies done and reported on in Scientific American. So, in other words, the term witch is a label, not an identity, and it's used to point out superstition or unauthorized religious activity, which is then immediately labeled to be an evil cult. We do know that it is, by and large, a shamanic thing. Now, an interesting connection which happened more in ancient China turns up, as you can probably have guessed, in a style of kung fu. And beggar style kung fu comes from the sect which, by and large, is now considered to be little more than fantasy, but may have existed back in the day, and there are certain people who claim to still train in it. And there were two varieties, the holy variety and the demonic variety. Now, what makes them different from other martial artists, besides their varying skill set in combat, which was very often quite vicious, it was also quite flowery. And the reason being was that very often these beggars or wanderers would make a living by putting on displays of martial ability and acrobatics. So it was not simply to defend themselves, but also a method by which they earned a living. So the sect was known also as people that had a vast network of information gathering abilities, may have been used even by varying leadership peoples to gather knowledge. But there is a very strict code of conduct surrounding it, and these sects are quite secretive in that regard. We know then that different people are involved in it, and what is critical within the sort of viewpoint, as it were, is whether or not it was aimed at good things, in which case they would not only do the kung fu, but also herbal healings and varying other things, and even exorcisms in that regard. The demonic sect, the bad ones, would obviously use their abilities to do bad things and control people. So we know that certain forms of divination were used. There was absolutely also quite a lot that involved getting money and thievery. If you're interested in which game you can find things like the Beggar Clan in, I believe the game is called The Age of Wushu, which is quite interesting. And of course, you've got the different styles reflected therein. But the particular martial arts side of it links up not only with your different views, but also with the social understanding. As we know that the Han Chinese society were somehow looked down upon by the more centralized ones. I don't know if they still are today, but they are quite different in culture, clothing, and all kinds of things in that regard. Um, and the good ones are said to be something like a kind of a wandering knight in a way. Um, and they are protectors of the poor in that regard. But they are also kind of robbers of the rich. So there is that to balance, as it were. And of course, you've got the different factions all around. So how you view this and whether or not these things were really, really real or um, just mythology that has come forward now to be used within games and such. I suppose that's quite hard to really uh, decide in that regard. But it nevertheless makes it very, very interesting as a story. And in Kung Fu magazine, yes, back in October of 2001, I think, if I recall correctly, um, they spoke of beggar style, and indeed, there were varying people interviewed that said that they actually do uh, train in it. So there was that style and type, um, which may or may not. Yeah, Terry Brown. There we go. Terry Brown from England, who was a former soldier, said that uh, he, having done a number of different forms of kung fu, he also did study the beggar's style, and he speaks of how it works and how it's particularly effective as well in that regard. And I suppose uh, there's a lot to be said about that sort of thing. Um, whether or not it's real, again, there are so many stories that can be true, might not be true. We do know for fact, and this is the bit that really we are getting to, uh, we do know for fact that Kung Fu is more than just a martial arts, and we know that it has a great deal to do with many different aspects of Chinese society, as martial arts does in all of the Asian countries. It's not merely designed as just a combat thing. So it ties in, as you see, with the Shaolin monks into religion, and of course it did into witchcraft and sorcery. And as you can imagine, the use of potions and things for healing almost guarantees that somebody somewhere is going to use it uh, in particular for poisonings and such. It's an inevitable thing. The use of divination, which is practically a standard in almost all forms of witchcraft all over the world. Um, Thank you so much for the likes there. I do appreciate that hugely. Um, it's a standard thing, but one of the things I have noticed is that we have a problem understanding divination in a great many ways. And the reason is, at least in the Western world, is that the meaning of the words have changed, and therefore the perception of what it means. So, in the modern sort of terminology, if I speak of fate, I'm talking about something that will definitely be. There is no way out of it. If you are fated to have a car accident tomorrow, you're going to have one regardless, because that's what fate means in the modern view of it. But this was not necessarily the case always, and different cultures have slightly different things. In many ways, and I think the best description I ever encountered was the one raised by Brian Bates in The Way of Weird, where he points out that fate is like a tree, and the main branch is the thickest, and that is kind of the branch that if you just carry on and do nothing to change things, that's the way it's going to go. But it's quite possible to slip down another branch if certain things are done. And the more you know of what is coming, the more you can move off down thinner and thinner branches, as it were, down more unlikely paths, so you can change your fate dependent on how much you are aware of it and how much power you have. So by changing your state, you can change whether or not that which is fated actually occurs. So it makes the idea of knowing the future much more important, because if I say to you, well, I can tell you the future, but know that fate is inevitable, you can't do anything about it, you'll have a car accident tomorrow, you might say, well, then in that case, what's the point of knowing the future? And you would be right. But if you were a person that could use that knowledge and reroute your fate, then it makes sense to need to or want to know the future. And therefore, it becomes a lot more important to society in that regard. And therefore, the powers of the witch becomes much more important. So we need to keep in mind that the changes in meaning matter a great deal. And I find myself that when the change is dramatic and obvious, it's a lot easier to understand. But when the change is kind of subtle, you often miss why things have changed and how things have changed. So it becomes a lot more important to understand the meanings of the words at the time. And the further back you go, of course, it's broken telephone. It's much, much harder to understand in that regard. And of course, as we have seen, some would tell you that what a witch is depends on what they've done. Do I believe everything is predetermined? No, I do not. I think the whole point of the future is that it isn't. I do believe that to a large degree you can change your future, and that's really the point of it. If everything was predetermined, why bother trying? It's going to happen anyway, which is sort of dumb. And it's true to say that freedom of choice alone is one of the key reasons why the future cannot be predetermined, because you can choose, which definitely does matter. As I was saying, though, the view of what a witch is has changed dramatically over history in different cultures. Sometimes it's a bad thing, sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's just another way of talking about a priest or priestess that is not of the majorly believed religions. And I could argue that if a witch is somebody that utilizes the magic, and magic is the use of powers beyond, I can accuse any religion or religious figurehead of being a witch of a different kind. You call it a priest doing miracles, same, and but different words. So a lot of it has to do with viewpoint of understanding what is meant. Um, and as I've pointed out at the beginning of this live, the most important bit is that what the practitioners might think they are compared with what the general public, or at least the ruling public, thinks they are, might not be the same thing, and might uh, cause a lot of clashes in that regard, such as, surprise, surprise, witch hunts. Um, if you are referring very, very specifically to evil witches, and you're saying that the witch hunt is designed to take out only the bad ones who are deliberately known to be committing some form of crime via their abilities, that I suppose would be different. The enforcement of the law for the good of society, whether it's done by mundane or magical means, is a necessity. And we do know that in more than one culture, there has been occasions where certain practices are considered to be illegal, not for the faith or the belief or the doing of the practice in general, but specifically when those practices are done in order to commit a crime. And it's not that they are against the practice so much as they are against the crime, which is a very different sort of a viewpoint if you're going to look at it in that way. And it definitely does matter. Um, we see that in South Africa as a good example. And in fact, there were a number of cases where people were arrested, jailed, and I think even executed for committing crimes for the reasons of witchcraft. But the cops didn't arrest them for the witchcraft. They didn't care about that. They arrested them because they committed murders in order to do the witchcraft. And it was the murders that they were arrested for and thereafter punished, which I think is very reasonable. I mean, we can't have people going around and committing murder no matter what their reason for it is. Um, it is what it is it not? So there is that aspect. But the biggest problem that we do face, of course, is the fact that people have used fear and superstition of witchcraft for political ends. And many of those accused of witchcraft, uh, they are not witches at all. They've got nothing to do with the price of eggs in that regard. Um, but it's a way to either control the public or it's a way to get specific people out of the way because they want very much um, to get a political gain, which they cannot do if those people are still around. So, in that regard, it's a change also in viewpoint, I suppose, which matters very, very much. Something we do need to consider. And we're seeing that repeatedly in a number of societies. Um, and I suppose in that regard, where you don't suddenly have specific crimes happening, you have to ask yourself, why are people blaming? You know, what are they getting out of it? And we see that over and over again. It's a way of getting at people more than it is about a particular faith or religion. Because, again, you might say that Wiccans are witches, and yes, the Wiccans do say they are witches, and are at least they claim to be reclaiming the word, as it were. But really and truly, they're following an older religion. Maybe a newer reconstruction of said older religion, but it's a religion nonetheless. It's simply a different religion to one of the 5 established religions that everybody's expected to follow. And strictly speaking, what we call in the modern day a pagan religion is any religion that isn't one of the 5 majority religions. That's all it is. Say what you will, it's the truth. So to speak of paganism and pagan faith as witchcraft, it's semantics, really. Does it matter? Should it matter? At the end of the day, as long as you do not commit any crime against society, you can believe what you like, really, if you're being fair. It's only when people start following religions that are, by their very creed and methodology, criminal, that you need to start worrying about them and suppressing that religion. If murder is done in the name of that religion, then that religion is a problem. Not because of the religion or belief itself, but because of the crimes being committed. That's where you have the issue that needs to be considered about. So, in that regard, yeah, that's what matters. I do think that fate, such as it is, in the old view of fate, is important and does matter. I think that very often, if you do nothing, things do tend to go in a certain way simply because of the nature of humanity and the way people interact. So I do think there's a lot to be said in that regard. But again, the point of being human is that we are able to command our own choices and take our own fate into our own hands, that by doing we can change what is. So, yes, it absolutely means that everything is not predetermined and we can make changes and improve on all that is in our lives by doing that. That's the point of being human, that we don't just troll along like an animal. And with all of that, that is the end of our views of the Chinese witches. So I don't know, what do you guys think? Do you have any comments? What do you think of the Chinese view of witchcraft? And with it all as well, where would you like the next place to be that we look at? We have done North America. We have done parts of South America. We have done England. We have done Germany. And we have done Scandinavia. And now we have done China. Where shall we search out witches next to see what may or may not be out there? Anybody got any preferences or things you would like to hear about or see? I think that we have a lot of good options. We did South Africa as well, but we still have large portions of Africa as yet untouched. So plenty of things there. And of course, we can go and check out a number of the areas in the Arabic lands as well. So, and of course, we will try to get to all of them eventually, but let me know what you think. Any preference at all? Any comments at all? Do tell, do tell. I would love to hear. But if there is nothing else to be said, my dear friends, then I am afraid that we are done for the evening, and I am going to bid you all a wonderful night. It's been very interesting. There's been a lot that we've been able to talk about. It's been good fun. I've enjoyed it immensely. I hope you did too. Remember to like and share and subscribe. And I'm hoping soon, if any of you happen to be interested, that I'll be able to do lives once in a while on my other channel where we talk about survival and survival things. So if you're interested in that, you may find me there at Blackbones124. So on that note, I bid you good night. Sleep sweet, sleep deep, but sleep with one eye open, and perhaps keep one of those holy symbols near at hand, just in case, because you never know. There are times when those things that go bump in the night might very possibly go bump for you.